Interesting site analysis diagram that exists in his book that includes topographic lines, a solar path. You can see from morning to noon into evening sun. We've got a indication of a tree line, so probably a dense woods with a few extra trees, and then a couple of buildings representing this property here, probably with a clearing in front, maybe even a retaining wall with a view. This diagrammatic language here representing panoramic view over a valley or over this stream bed or over this particular scenic area. So a lot of the diagrammatic language that we use for this, including the orientation of perhaps either winds or solar gain or access or path to an arrival point, and even the cardinal directions laid into this particular diagram. So Ching has really, I think, made a pattern for a lot of others to follow. So if you start to look at site analysis diagrams or on Pinterest, you start to pull out a few of these examples. Again, very similar, representing the solar path, representing views out from a property, representing the tree line and any additional clearings, representing the topographic lines, which might come from GIS or from another generator. A more extensive version of that with the north facing to the left, we've got a combination here of grasses and trees, an approach to storage of vehicles, and then this property then follows a few elements of interior and exterior elements, and then points to views, winds coming in, solar path, as well as other prevailing breezes from the winter and summer winds coming into the property, fully rendered in colored pencil and ink. Another interesting one, another version. This is a little bit looser colored pencil here with representation of trees and of topo lines using different colors or different values of green to represent the topography. And then you can see this solar path from summer solstice, winter solstice, and as well as this property overlooking a fairly busy traffic situation. Here's prevailing winds from the southwest, and then blocked views. Here, some framed views into this woods here, and a few other diagrammatic elements included in that. Here's one that's hand-drawn and then quickly rendered into Photoshop. We can see the property or the project kind of working its way in the middle, talking about potential drainage, the approach, compression and release through woods, and then arriving at the property, prevailing breezes coming from the southwest, and an incorporation of the solar diagram here according to the north orientation into the upper right. And then incorporation of enhancement zones and views down into the valley. Loose incorporation of pencil topo lines. This example from Arkin and Tilt of the Hidden Valley Hostel shows the multiple buildings as part of that hostel's campus. Just outside of San Francisco, we've got an incorporation of the solar diagram and the cardinal directions, and we've got these interesting arcs that extend from the circle that talk about what is viewable from the site down towards dense foliage, meadow, trees, dry landscape, and otherwise, as well as incorporation of summer breezes and winter storms. Another example, starting to use landscape graphics to represent a framed meadow here, but also incorporation of the solar diagram and winds, as well as views out from the property. So these views become pretty important in terms of how your project is situated and what the project is looking at from its particular spot, what people see and experience from the middle of the project site, and also talking about site access. Larger project looks like a master plan that incorporates some housing. Maybe it's a resort or a retreat center. It's a little bit larger, But you can see the side plan is more extensively drawn first, but it's then ghosted in gray, and then these diagrammatic elements are laid over it in some form of software. We can see a narrative here. We can see a key plan, full legend, as well as north arrow and scale bar with the incorporation of solar path, the incorporation of summer and winter winds, the specific vector of sunset at different points of the year that a solar diagram or a sun angle diagram gives you, as well as the incorporation of the cardinal directions, as well as views to specific landmarks in the form of mountain peaks in this particular situation. Kind of a looser one, a little bit hard to see, entirely hand-drawn, but it's a loose conceptual diagram of a small quadrangle for a community college, and then pulled off several notes, but laying over the cardinal directions as well as the solar diagram around it. So I've selected the pinnacles for this example. We can see the incorporation of the topo lines from Professor Metz's exercises. This is generated entirely from Google Earth. I've included or kept the north arrow and the scale representation. That'll be something that I can build into the legend, but I've turned off all the other options for the export from Google Earth. And I've exported it as an HD size image, which fits very well on 11 by 17. And then these are some of the diagrammatic elements that I will demonstrate for you here shortly. Illustrator, I'll go to create new and go to print. I can select a custom here. I'll go with 17 inches. Just change the orientation and the units to inches. 17 by 11. CMYK color. We can select our output here, whether it be high or medium. Preview mode, I'll stick with default. This will show vector. Then create this, and then one of the first things I do when I get started, I make sure I prefer the painting workspace because it gives a lot of different things here on the right column that are really easy to use. It also gives some nice things that are quick references, as well as the toolbar to the left and above it. So I want to make sure this is my personal preference, but for diagramming is the painting workspace. And then I go under view, and then under I show a grid, and that just reminds me that we are dealing with a white piece of paper, but that different things can be oriented to a grid. We can, if we want to, we can even have things snap to the grid, but some folks prefer that. Some folks don't. Prefer a little bit looser situation there. Site again. I've selected with the topo lines following Professor Metz's exercises. Just want to get a good look at things. Basically, this is a small valley in between three mountain ranges here in the Pinnacles National Park. Get in a little bit close here. And I've got a lot of my labels turned on. I can turn a lot of that off, but it's good to be able to refer back to Google Earth so you can remember road names, street names, road names, things of that nature. So I can turn all of this off. And I can reset the tilted compass. Turn the terrain back on. And you can see different elements of the picture when 3D buildings and terrain are turned on. That might give you a different era, but also give you a little bit more color. Google Earth has different imagery for these types of things. You can see the imagery changes. We go back to two-dimensional imagery. It might be from a different time. This has a little more color. You can see how Google Earth stitches together different images. Get in a little bit close, but not too close. I think my primary site is probably going to be right here. We've got a little bit of drainage and erosion happening here. On this sub peak here, we've got maybe a little bit of a channel centered. And then get ready to export this as a map. So I'll go to save image, map options. I'll turn off title and description. I'll turn off the legend. The scale and the compass are fairly large, so I might scale that down to 50%. And you can see how that makes that considerably smaller. I can then select the resolution of the image that I want to save. The current resolution is for the screen of my Macintosh computer, 1093 by 687 pixels. We can bump that up to something a little bit larger, but the HD images are working pretty well for 11 by 17. You can see the scale bar and the compass are still visible. If they're not visible, we can bump them up again. Yeah, something like that. And then I'll save the image. One of the default. When we have the workspace set for painting, we get a layers menu over here, which is nice. And I can immediately go to place, and I can pick out the image. Pinnacle space map. It'll come in like this. It'll be fairly large. So scale it down a little bit. What I do is I grab the corner and then put my finger on the shift key, and this will scale things proportionally in Illustrator. Take that and leave about a quarter of an inch on either side, because the color laser printers at Ball State don't typically do full bleed, so we want this to be a little bit smaller than the edges. The grid helps us kind of orient that, because that's typical for our color laser environment in terms of the printers that are available to us at Ball State. Immediately, I will click on the image and then go to Object and then Lock Selection, and that will lock it down. This way, if I click on it with something, that background image won't move around on me, and that can be quite annoying if you don't lock the background image. I'll call this the base map, or the background base map, something like that, as an initial layer. And I'll make a new layer. I'm going to call this the ghost. I'm going to create a ghost layer. We're going to kind of mute some of the color and contrast that's available in this particular image. I'll start with a rectangle, and I'll just start in one corner and then cover the entire image like so. So that's rectangles and shapes are all bundled together here on this left-hand column: ellipses, polygons, line segments. And then these circles here control the roundedness of these. So if you want to use Illustrator for a bubble diagram, or an area diagram, or a functional diagram, this is where you do it. You can grab these corners and pull them in like so until it makes kind of this bean shape. It's not going to do an ellipse because that's a different tool, but rounded corners are sometimes desirable for making diagrams, functional diagrams, or bubble diagrams. In this case, I'll just leave that to the default. Do a little undo there. And I'll keep the corner radius snapped to the corners like so. I then will change its opacity. This is one of the things that's really nice about the painting workspace, is that a lot of this good stuff is happening right up here. It's really close to us. At the moment, I've selected a fill for this rectangle, white, and I've selected no stroke at all. That's an option between fill and stroke. Fill is the color in the shape. Stroke is the outline of the shape. We can select those options for this particular white rectangle. And then I will turn down the opacity till it's successfully muting the contrast in the colors on this background layer. We want to put a lot of diagramming language on top of this, and so it's necessary to really mute this map, make it still suggestive of the terrain and the topo and the different elements, but it effectively becomes a form of digital trace paper that we're doing here in terms of putting this rectangle on it. Also, I'll bump this down to the realm of 50 to 60 to 70%. Remember, when we print things on a color laser printer, everything comes out darker anyway. So it's good to be able to mute the colors and contrasts of a lot of different things, and then put imagery and information and diagrammatic elements on top. Could even, in that realm of even 80%, it might even work for us. Just as I did with the previous image, I will now click on that white box and then go to Object, Lock Selection, and that will lock that ghost in place. It's also on its own layer, so that is now isolated on its own layer. So if I click on anywhere on the environment here, it will not move. So we have a ghost rectangle that's at about 70% above the base layer. So I'll make a new layer, and I'm call this areas. We want areas to be on top of the ghost, and the ghost is on top of the background basement. Next is an opportunity to take a look at the pen tool. We have the pen tool, and then we have the curvature pen tool. Pen tool is really good for making these different areas. Now our chosen site is right in here, so what I'll start to do then is to plot some points. We probably need to pick a color that's appropriate for our site. We could think about a light orange or a peach. We don't need a stroke, so we'll pick a color that this will become. And as I work, I'm going to automatically work with a lower opacity so that we can trace over things and be able to see it as Illustrator starts to make this area with the pen tool. So my primary site consideration, I believe, is right in here, and we can use line segments to do that. If there's a slight curvature to the line segment, what we do with the pen tool is we click and then hold it down, and then you can pull the line segment in a curve, which is very nice. So just by pulling and holding it down, that starts to create an area there. And then I'll switch the opacity down in around about 60%. So it's like laying a piece of colored film directly onto the Illustrator layer. Even down to 50%, you can see that's now highlighting this particular area. These areas also can have line around them. So this is representing a colored film, representing this light orange or this light peach layered on top. We then can add a stroke to it. We feel that bumps up its visibility. If I add a red stroke in the form of 12 points, it's going to layer that around like so. 12 points, 40 points, 10 points, something like that. We also have the option to modify that stroke. So if I click on the stroke menu right there, we can see we can modify the corners. We can make this a dashed line, and I can tell Illustrator how far apart to make those dashes. 2-point dash makes a very nice line around our site, basically tells our viewer and brings attention to the viewer right away. So that's one example of how to use the fill and the stroke, and then aspects of the stroke menu to start to add character to a particular shape, which you might be highlighting, or you might be putting a colored layer over in order to describe a specific area. Next, your research station might be doing some testing in this valley, or might be doing soil testing or something like that. Let's do another area. I'm going to turn off the stroke and then change the fill to a different green. Keep the opacity going. And so this then represents picked the wrong pen. I need to pick the regular pen. Start to draw segments here. Maybe this represents one of the testing areas. Close that up. Now that's a single shape, and I'll bump the opacity down to about 50%, something like that. So that maybe that represents one testing area, soil testing area or otherwise. There's another potential area down here. I want it to connect with my other area. Diagrammatically, this starts to create some types of colored film, highlighting specific areas around your site. Each layer has about 4 levels of hierarchy, so if I wanted a particular fill to appear on top of it, they are on the same layer at the moment, but this can be brought to the front, and this will sit on top of the other portions here if they're intersecting or overlapping at all. I can also move this around once it's made. I can bump up the opacities or otherwise allow these different things to coexist together on this particular site. Let's go back and click on one of the other ones, and it'll take the properties forward, kind of a shortcut in Illustrator. If you want to do another something of something, then you just click on that and it'll take you forward. Maybe this represents, I'll do a little bit of a curvature here. Kind of get the hang of it a little bit. A little bit of curve there. This is something you really have to practice with the mouse or with the trackpad. This alternating between straight lines and curved lines is a little bit of something you need to practice in Illustrator. There. There's a curve there. Curve around this area here. A little slight curve there. Maybe this represents the extent of where the research team is testing. Maybe they're doing soil testing or testing different plants, something like that. Click on that again, bump the opacity down 50–60%, something like that. Okay, so this represents how we can use the equivalent of like colored film, laying that over like we would with a highlighter marker or with a particular type of colored gel. You can bump these around. You can adjust these a little bit. And you can also add anchor points, or you can modify a shape and add anchor points or delete anchor points, things like that. Also can go to Object Path Simplify, and we'll kind of blend it. It'll take those anchor points that you've made this shape with, and it'll modify it, smooth it out, kind of a nice thing to smooth out different Illustrator shapes. So that represents areas. I'll make another, I'll call this lines and arrows. I'm going to do a series of arrows now that represent different vectors that are happening, maybe different winds or different access points. There are a couple of roads here, so we'll probably do that next. I'll pick a nice warm color for that, maybe a red, to represent roads coming into the site, or the closest road that's visible on the site. And I'll zoom in a little bit here and use the pen tool for this. Starting from here, this is now above the areas. And Illustrator will look at other points as ways to create anchors. And to stop something, often I'll click on the selection arrow. That'll stop the pen tool from working. It can be quite frustrating if the pen tool wants to keep going. So you need to sort of either you need to click on one of the selection arrows here to stop the pen tool from working. In this case, I don't want a fill. I want a stroke. And I want it to be fairly thick. And I want to add an arrowhead to it. So the arrowheads are in here. It's a few styles of arrows. That's quite big, so I will bump the size of that arrowhead down to about 50%, like so. And maybe I go to Object Path, Simplify, and it will make the arrow a little bit simpler there. That's a way that you can start to bend things a little bit. See, this little slider bar will essentially take an arrow like that and then we'll simplify it nicely for you. Okay, so that's one path leading out from the site. Next, I'll start with that anchor point and I will start with that anchor point here, close to it. And I'll draw now the other road. A little bit of curvature here. Represent the next road heading out. And then go to Object, Path, Simplify. Kind of bend that a little bit. And I'll put an arrowhead on that. Click on the stroke menu. Be consistent. I would say pick an arrowhead that you like and then be fairly consistent with it. It's got to be 50%. Scale the arrowhead down. Then if these two things are similar or the same genre, we can take these two arrows, we can go to Object Path and then join them. And they will actually join together like so. It needs to have arrow. It will eliminate the arrowhead, so you do need to add the arrowhead to either side. It can be a little frustrating if your arrowheads disappear, but it essentially is a double-sided line at this point. There's another road heading south. I'll grab that. Pen tool. Start that here, curving around. Slow road heading out, heading south. There. And we'll put an arrowhead on that. So I just click on the line itself, stroke menu, put an arrowhead on it. Make it 50%. Back to the stroke menu. If the arrowhead is in the wrong place, this little button right here will swap the start and the end of the arrowheads there. And then I can click on this line, and then go Object, Path, Join, and that will join all of them together. That didn't work out so well. So what I need to do is zoom in a little bit, and I need to extend this path by grabbing that anchor point and then putting it there. Okay. Zoom out a little bit. Oops, zoom out. Command minus is my shortcut for that. There's also a hand tool where you can move around like that. And I need to highlight this particular line, stroke menu, and then invert. So this now represents the 3 roads that move in and out of the site. I need to remember the names of the roads so I can go back into Google Earth or even look at Google Maps and understand their names relative to each other. This can be adjusted here a little bit. There we go. All right, next we'll do wind. So prevailing winds, there might be climatology data you can access. There might be prevailing winds in this particular part of the States or Mexico or Canada, climate data that you can bring in. And it can stay on the same layer, or you can make it a new layer. I'm going to pick a different color for wind. Maybe it's in a light cyan or something like this. And then I will use the curvature pen for that. Curvature pen, similar to the pen tool, but the pen tool is a combination of line segments and curvature. This will only do curvature, so I'm going to make a curved line. It kind of works like this. And then now it's got a fill on it. I actually don't want a fill on it. And it's got a red stroke at the moment. I want it to be a light cyan. And you can decide if it's a dashed line or solid line by unclicking this. And I can bump this up to something a little bit thicker. And I can add the stroke menu. I'll add another arrowhead to that. That's really big. So I got to scale it down. And then edit, copy, paste in place. We'll make a copy of that arrow. You can double it. Edit, copy, paste in place. We'll put it right there. And so this can start to represent winter winds coming from the northwest. If I click on that and then hold down the shift key, click on another, and then click on the other, I can go to object group, and then now they will function as a group. So if I needed to rotate the whole group, I can do that. Represent winter winds coming down from this mountain pass. I can scale the whole group down like this. It's not going to affect the size of the arrowheads. It's not going to affect the stroke width, but I can now move the entire group together. Maybe this is fairly large. And if I need to make adjustments then to the stroke weight, I can do that, and it'll update all the stroke weights like so. Okay. Inversely, summer winds are a little bit warmer, so I'll go to edit, copy, edit, paste. And here's another set of winds. Let's move to the south now. If the primary winds are from the southwest, rotate these around. So this represents summer winds coming out of the southwest. Maybe they have a slightly different character to them. You can adjust the whole group now. Watch them dance around. Bop, 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 bop. But they're going to be accelerating coming over these mountains as they represent southwesterly winds. I may pick a slightly different color or lighten it. You can lighten it a little bit there so that they are slightly different from the winter winds. I'll zoom out. Let's see, and check my work. Pretty good. Okay. So that represents a few lines and arrows that might represent paths or approaches to the site or roads. This starts to represent wind. Now for some hydrology. So we've got some erosion coming down. Water flows from these mountains and down into this valley, so that it might be an interesting thing to continue as well. Within every layer, we've got about 4 sub-layers that are kind of built in. So we might consider an entirely different layer for hydrology, or we can even incorporate it into this layer. Totally up to you. But just keep in mind, if you know Photoshop, you know that there's a benefit to having different layers going on. So maybe you can always combine a layer later. So I'm going to call this hydrology. And I'll pick the curvature pen and a color, maybe a darker blue. Oops. See, those layers were already selected, so very important to unselect something. So I'll pick the curvature pen again. And we've got some water running down these mountain passes, so we can see the ridges and you can see the valleys, and so that's going to create a little bit of erosion. So I'll grab that curve. And unclick there. And I think I will make that a dashed line. There's only a 2-point gap in between, and then put a small arrowhead on it. Maybe it's a different class of arrowhead. Maybe it's a... So this represents water now running down the side of this mountain. Similarly, we have, unclick that, click off, and then start another curvature. Not that curvy actually, but this now represents water coming down there. Click off. Stroke menu. We picked a different arrowhead for the water here. Make sure that's highlighted first. That was bumped down to 50%. Maybe there's a similar arrow. Copy, paste in place. Here's a copy of it. I can rotate it. You've got a similar condition. You don't need to redraw each one. Maybe you can massage these so that they can happen similarly. It has a similar curvature. You don't have to draw each one exactly the same. These guys are unfortunately on the wrong layer, I discovered. Here's a good trick. You could just select those 3 arrows and we'll cut them away and then make the layer I want active, and then I can paste them in place. So now they're on the layer where I want them. So that's a nice little trick. If you ever find yourself in trouble making elements on the wrong layer, you can always cut them away and then put them on the layer that you feel that they should be. So some more hydrology happening here. There's a sort of a stream bed here. I'll make a curvature pen. This stream bed here goes underneath the road, goes north. I'll click off. So that's all together now, and we'll put an arrowhead at one end, assuming that it flows downward. Flip it. That gets a little bit smaller. Just make sure that arrowhead is the size that I want it. Like so. Okay. Hydrology can exist below lines and arrows. So now everything that's on hydrology will go underneath. So now our road here will actually show it passing over the stream bed as so. Okay. Lines and arrows. Let's do some symbols. Symbols in the form of asterisks or things of that nature. Let's build an asterisk. So let's just zoom into a portion here of our site. And maybe this represents the site. So I'll use the line segment tool. I'll make it a nice bold red or pink or maroon, something like that. And I'm going to build an asterisk. I'll hold the shift key down to keep it straight. That didn't work. Try it again. Okay, go back to the stroke menu. I'm going to undash the line like that. Then inversely, I'll do the inverse bar. Kind of adjust that, get that to where I want it. Illustrator will proportionally tell you how things intersect and how they interact. Give you little cues here with the pink lines that tell you exactly where things are. Hold down the shift key. Illustrator will hold a 45-degree angle as well. Move that into place there. And it might not be perfect, might be pretty good. Just adjust this a little bit, but also make it your own. Now I'll highlight, holding down the shift key, I'll highlight all 3 bars like so, and I'll make that a group. And now this becomes a scalable group. It won't change, it won't change stroke weight or anything like that. So you might use this particular object now across different parts of your diagram, but it won't change stroke weight at the moment. You want to still have the ability to adjust the stroke weight, make a perfect symbol there. We'll now zoom out, fit the artboard in the window. And so now, get a couple of these going. Hold down the shift key, you can scale it uniformly. And maybe bump the stroke weight down again. So that's a nice asterisk. It'll bring emphasis to something in our entire diagram. That can be copied, paste in place, and that'll now paste. You can start to copy that. You can also copy and paste elements from this diagram into other files later. Maybe these asterisks need to be a different color as they don't relate to the site itself. You can pick an analogous color, start to use your power of color theory and distinguish those as points of emphasis that are separate from the site itself. That's how you can start to build some shapes and symbols that have some emphasis on the diagram. They are at full opacity, as you can see, and so they lay on top of the other lines and the other transparent areas as well. We'll lay in some of the solar information. So I'll make another layer called solar diagram. And I think I'm going to select everything at the moment just so it doesn't move around on me. I can lock all of those now. So all those elements are going to be locked, and so they won't move around. So I'll make solar diagram the active layer. I'll go to file in place. It has provided some solar path diagrams for us. This site, Pinnacles National Park in California, happens to be at 36 degrees north latitude, so I'll select that one. So Professor Metz has provided this to all of our instructors, and so your instructor will provide this particular solar path diagram for you. I'm just going to place that now onto the pasteboard, and using the shift key, I'll extend it up, make it nice and big. So we're going to trace this, and then we're going to lay in the information on it, and then delete it away. So I want to make sure that it's on its own layer. Okay, so this solar path diagram, sometimes these are called solar roses, represent the sun's path and the time, relative time of sunrise and sunset. So the solar diagram is the active layer. Probably want warm colors for this. So I'll pick the curvature pen tool and pick a stroke. Need to click off of this first. There we go. Okay, curvature pen tool. Pick a nice warm yellow and make it fairly big, fairly thick. And I'll make a curvature for this path here representing the summer solstice. 3-point curve typically, so I'll start by extension there, go to this vertex, and then curve around to its opposite end there, and we'll make that curvature there. Like so. Bump that up. Maybe it's more like the realm of 18 or 20, something like that. Okay, so that's the first curvature this represents. This could be adjusted, of course. Now you can move this, stretch it a little bit so it's representing close to the summer solstice, when the sun is highest in the sky versus when it's the lowest in the sky. And I'll take the curvature tool here, and I don't want it to continue that previous one. I want to start a new one, so I'm going to go from here, make it a 3-point curve, second point, third point, and then click off. And then it represents the solar path at the winter solstice. And these two things, okay, bring this down like so. I can delete this image away, and we've got now pathways here representing the solar path. So if I now click the two of them, holding down the Shift key, and group them together, they will function as a group. So I can make this fairly large, lay it over the site, change their opacity. So if you don't want it to be covering up a lot of information, the solar path could be laid into this along with all this other information. That way it doesn't obstruct a lot of other things. I can actually lay that on fairly thin like so. And then I'll do a sun, if you will, using the shape tool. I'll make an ellipse with no stroke and with a uniform yellow fill. Can move that into place. Get a good size going, and then I'll copy, paste in place, and just then move these suns into place. Noon sun, morning sun, evening sun. Paste in place is a nice thing. Get a little bit of a conflict here, but I think we'll figure out a way to deal with it in a moment. Select all of these. Hold down the Shift key, I'll select all these elements. This, 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 and this, and make them a group. So now they're a group. And you may wish to add arrows to represent the specific solar angles emanating from each of these little suns. That may be something you want to continue as well. Kind of just give you a reminder of where the sun is going to be hottest in the afternoon, just at sunset, just before sunset, or how the rays will be directing from the noon sun. But this then is a curvature that represents directly from how the sun behaves at 36 degrees north latitude. Next, top layer elements. Sometimes I just like to put a nice circle over it. You can deal with, we want to deal with the north arrow cardinal directions. Something like that. It's no fill and a very thin black stroke. Match that with the solar angle. And maybe we marry the cardinal directions to that. We can do a north arrow in the legend here, or we can actually continue that notion of the cardinal directions as incorporated into this. So I think what I'll do is a line segment here, this midpoint representing east, this point. Look for the Q's again, representing, that was west, sorry. East, west, my goodness. I'll make this, bump this up just a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker there. Make that maybe 3 points. Put an arrowhead on it. Maybe I can marry that to the circle. Let that intersect with the circle. Or just slightly overlap the circle. Circle radius will be referred to, that'll work. And you notice how the pink guidelines here will help you line that stuff up. Put an arrowhead on that. Flip it. And move that just a little bit like that. Put an arrowhead on that. Down. And maybe, I don't know, I think this noon sun is probably pretty important, so maybe we'll put a different kind of stroke around that. What if we put slightly different yellow stroke around this? Maybe a 10-pointer like that, or even a 12-pointer, make that a dashed line that represents sort of the sun's rays. So that's represents the peak sun in the south. Something like that. Can I get this going? To complete this diagram, I'm going to label everything. So I tend to put all my labels on their own layer, and they exist on top. So I'll go ahead and do that now using the type tool. So we have the type tool, the vertical type tool, and the type on the path tool. All very good stuff. So the type on the path tool is interesting because it will follow this particular circle here, and we can type things directly onto that circle. So maybe we can set our font, standard Arial, the Arial bold, 18 points. We can set the paragraph. Maybe this is paragraph center. And the type on a path tool, once you select a path, you then can type directly onto that path. So I've got 800 feet here, and I've divided it in half, divided that into half. So that starts to represent then, I can make a graphic bar scale that represents a couple of different line segments, a couple of different lengths. It's a simple bar scale that goes down and up and around like so. So if the total is 800 feet and the midpoint was 400 feet, then this would represent 200 feet. So then I take my typing tool and I do a 0. Put that there. Copy and paste that. Move that, oops, move that down. Move that new number down. So the next number would be 200 feet. Type tool, just get in there and correct that to 200 feet. Copy, paste in place. Move that over, change that to 400 feet. Copy, paste in place. Move that over, and that makes the total of 800 feet. Take those numbers and the new bar scale, select all of them, and then group them together. And I can delete away these other elements that helped me trace them together. So north arrow is its own group, and this bar scale is now its own group. The legend can get bigger, of course, and can actually cover up the original Google Earth information if you wish. Now the diagram has its own scale and its own north arrow that's independent from Google Earth's information. Just need to group these together again. Then continue to build out the character of this title block. Zoom back out again. Just need to unlock everything and grab some things. So everything needs to be unlocked. And then I can grab copies of things and bring them into the legend. Just that. And any element that's in here that needs to be referenced in the legend. If it's not directly labeled, if it's something that is not directly labeled, then that can something can appear in the legend. Usually, if things are directly labeled, that's not as necessary, but it's good to support a lot of different things in the legend. Okay, so I showed you how to do a bar scale and how to start to build out your legend. Let's get ready to save this. So for my personal records, I always save this as an Illustrator file that will preserve all of the elements. So this is the Pinnacles context map and sign analysis. And that's going to be an Illustrator file. I'll save that to a desktop, back it up to my cloud, or back it up to a personal storage device. That'll preserve everything in its fashion, so you can always come back to an Illustrator file and you can grab stuff and copy stuff to the pasteboard and paste things into other Illustrator files. And then I'm going to do an export, which will, if you export it as a PNG, it will preserve the transparency of anything behind it. If you export it as a JPEG, then that becomes an image that you can drop into a PowerPoint or into an email or into another composition. JPEG is a compressed image, a TIFF is an uncompressed image. So it's always good to save multiple things. But again, a PNG would preserve the transparency of this. A JPEG would turn all of this background to white. So I'll export a JPEG of it, and you can then decide on the resolution, whether that be 150 to 300 dpi. So now it's saving as a JPEG. And then I also like to save a copy as a PDF, an Adobe PDF. So that really makes it a smaller file that you can submit digitally or print. It's really good to submit a print version of this. So when you submit things to your instructor, we really do enjoy PDFs because they're easy to open and they're fairly small files. So I've saved now 3 versions of this. I'll make it compatible with Adobe 8. Sometimes we need to, depending on the situation, sometimes things are better saved as an older version of PDFs for the plotters and things like that, but I'll save this down. That'll automatically open up in my version of Acrobat. So if you have the full version of Adobe Acrobat downloaded as part of your Adobe suite, you can take a look at that PDF right away, and you can also reduce its file size in Acrobat. That'll take the large image and compress it down to something that's easily submitted to Canvas or easily printable. Okay, that completes our exercise.